Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is David Huxley from icare's mobile engagement team, coming to you from the far north coast of New South Wales, where I live. I'm on Bundjalung country. I'd like to pay my respects to elders, people, and ancestors of this country where I live. Also, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians on the various lands in which we all work today, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. Now, before I get stuck in, I just want to cover off on a little bit of housekeeping. With over 1,000 registrations for today's webinar, everyone's camera and microphone are now disabled, so there should be no interruptions. With regards to questions, it's nearly impossible to get to everyone's question in these forums. So, as many of you have raised questions during that registration process, we'll be covering off on most of those during this session itself. And time permitting, we're going to respond to a few raised in this session at the end for those who want to hang around for a couple extra minutes. Look, the final bit of housekeeping is that I want to add is that the session is now being recorded and will be made available on our webpage in due course, probably in about 1 to 2 weeks' time. And we'll also email that out to everyone that is registered for today. So today's webinar, gone too far ahead. Today's webinar is tailored especially for new employers in New South Wales, and hopefully by the end of the session, you will have a better understanding of who icare is and what we do, the policy renewal cycle and how premiums are calculated, what you should do after a workplace injury, as well as how to access the various savings or discounts that are available, and maybe just bust a few myths along the way. And look, joining me to present today's session is my colleague, Kristen Harrigan. Thanks for joining me today, Kristen. How are you going?
Thank you. Well, thank you.
First time we've done a webinar together, which is
It
very
is
exciting.
very.
Very good, very good. Now, look, we've got a lot to cover in only 30 minutes, so we'll get stuck into it. Now, look, I've already mentioned, Kristen, that today's session is tailored for New South Wales icare policyholders, and that in a moment, Christian, I'll clarify exactly why, Christian will clarify why you need a workers' compensation policy and what it covers. But first, I'll just set the scene in terms of a national perspective, as this is quite often misunderstood. Like most things in this country and Australia, each state and territory has its own scheme and is governed by local, state, or territory legislation. And therefore, each have their different organisations running each jurisdiction's own workers' compensation scheme. In a few slides' time, I'll cover off on what you should be doing if you have workers or businesses in different states or territories. In New South Wales, there are 3 key stakeholders that you may have heard about: CIRA, SafeWork, and icare. Now, CIRA is the State Insurance Regulatory Authority, and it regulates a number of statutory insurances such as workers' compensation, CTP insurance, amongst other products. Then we have SafeWork New South Wales, which is the Work Health and Safety Regulator. And then we have icare. And look, one of icare's key roles is to administer the workers' compensation scheme amongst other insurance schemes. Also in New South Wales, we have third parties which tender for various claims management services in the workers' compensation scheme. So when you have a workplace injury, a claim may be managed by one of the 5 claim service providers that you can see on the screen. These providers manage workers' compensation claims on behalf of icare. However, icare does manage all premium and policy functions in-house. Now, if you're not sure who your claim service provider is, you can check on your certificate of currency, which is in your renewal pack, or simply report a new workplace injury direct to icare, and then the claim will be allocated to one of the 5 claim service providers shown on the screen. So, Kristen, over to you. Why don't you now explain who needs a workers' compensation policy and what that policy provides?
Thanks, Hugs. So, as most of you know, you are required to take out a workers' compensation policy if you have employees who are deemed workers under the New South Wales workers' compensation legislation. Hugs will explain deemed workers in a little bit more detail shortly. A workers' insurance policy provides an employer with coverage in the event of any of their employees suffering a work-related injury or illness. This can be physical or psychological. Workers' compensation insurance in New South Wales is a no-fault system. This means to be eligible, workers do not have to prove that their employer was negligent. They need to prove that their injury was work-related and that employment was the main or substantial contributing factor to the injury. And workers' compensation provides several benefits that can be accessed should a worker be injured in a workplace. And this includes weekly compensation benefits, which are usually reimbursed to the employer, medical and hospital expenses to ensure appropriate and timely treatment is provided to the injured worker, and a focus on getting quick treatment approvals if required. Rehabilitation services, which can assist in establishing suitable duties and or a return to work plan. Certain personal items can be covered if they've been damaged due to the incident, for example, ripped clothing or damaged spectacles due to the accident or incident occurring, and also covers lump sum payments for death or permanent impairment, which obviously does relate to the more serious incidents. Now, Hux, there is one group of employees that don't need a policy if they just hire staff for a really short period of time, and those workers will still be covered automatically. And these are known as exempt employers. And as an exempt employer, you don't need a policy if you pay less than $7,500 in annual wages, plus you don't employ an apprentice or trainee, or you're not a member or a group member or premium purposes. So if you are an exempt employer and you do have a workplace injury, you're still covered. You do have an obligation to report the claim though on 134422. So, Hux, can you explain a few of the different employer and worker categories, as it can be really confusing for employers as far as like who's covered and who's not?
Yeah, and look, thanks, Chris. And we did receive quite a few questions through that registration process from people attending the session here. So I'm going to try and keep it as simple as we possibly can, because it can get a little bit complicated. Sole traders and partners in a partnership are not covered by the policy itself. It's just the workers of the sole trader or the partners. If the sole trader or partners want to be covered for an accident, they may need to take out, a personal accident or an income protection type policy, which can be done, direct through, insurance agent or insurance broker or like. Now, with regards to proprietary limited companies, the directors that work day to day in the business are likely to be deemed working directors, meaning that they would be covered for a workplace accident. But they also need to declare the payments that they receive under the policy itself. And I'll provide you with some more information about that, or how you can get more information about that if you need to know a little bit more. So I'm going to move on now to a few more difficult areas, a little more complicated areas here on the next screen. So the first column here, I'm going to talk about who is a worker, who is not a worker, then who might be a worker. So with regard to who is a worker, we've got apprentices there. Apprentices are covered on the policy. And for those people that employ apprentices, you probably know and understand this, that whilst you still need to declare the wages paid to your apprentices, you will receive a discount on the wages as they're removed from the calculation at the end. So I'm going to cover off on that a little later on, how that works. With regard to labour hire businesses, if you engage the labour hire company, that company will bear the risk in terms of the workers' compensation policy and the premiums payable, but also any claims that might occur. You just need to check they have a policy in place, of course, and you can do this by requesting a copy of their certificate of currency. But also, you've got to provide a safe workplace for the staff that you are contracting in from the labour hire. Casual and seasonal workers, as well as cash in hand workers, are all covered by workers' compensation policy, and you should be declaring payment to these workers in your declaration form. Now, I've already discussed working directors. For those working directors working day to day and drawing some form of remuneration for doing so, once again, you're likely to be covered under the policy, and you do need to declare those payments on the policy declaration form. Now, for those who are not workers, volunteers, when it comes to volunteers, they're just not recognised under the legislation. But there is specialty volunteer insurance available that you can purchase through a broker or perhaps an insurance agent or insurance company direct to cover any volunteers that you might engage. Now, the very last two categories might be workers. Again, a little more complex. We have cross-border workers and contractors, and we did receive a large number of questions about these categories. I've already mentioned that each state and territory has its own scheme. And if you have workers that usually work in a certain jurisdiction outside of New South Wales, then they're likely to be workers of that state or territory. So you should have a policy in that jurisdiction. The various regions, however, have come together and developed cross-border guidelines, which recognises that a worker can cross a state boundary for a temporary period of up to 6 months and still be covered in that state where they usually work. Now, for contractors, this is also not always black and white, but there is a series of control tests which help us to determine if a contractor could be a worker or perhaps a true contractor. It's important to note that if you engage with someone who has an ABN number, that doesn't automatically make them a contractor, especially if you are in control of the job or the work to be completed. Now, I do encourage anyone with questions about cross-border workers or contractors to contact icare or the relevant state authority in the jurisdiction they might be working, as it's quite often a case-by-case situation. So, Christian, will I change the slide here? Um, we've looked at who is covered now, but there are a couple of different employer categories here in New South Wales. So why don't you explain the difference between the two?
Sure thing, Hux. So in New South Wales, we have two main categories of employers based on the employer's average performance premium, or APP. So to determine the employer's premium category, we need to work out the employer's average performance premium, which we simply get by multiplying the wages by the industry rate. And we'll show everyone an example of this in a moment. So to define what a small employer is, these are the employers whose APP is less than $30,000 or below, and they're not part of a group of policies that exceed $30,000 in the group average performance premium. I'll add that small employers represent about 90% of New South Wales workers' compensation scheme, which equates to well over 300,000 policies. And to bust a myth, to highlight that a small employer's policy is not subject to adjustment as a result of any claims that they have, unless their APP is above $30,000. So, to reinforce the point, if you're a small employer, there are no additional premium impacts for reporting a workplace injury. And importantly, by reporting a claim, it allows for treatment to commence ASAP so that the worker can recover quicker, and also allows for that return to work planning to get started. The next category is experience rated employers, and these are the employers whose premium is above $30,000. The main difference between these and small employers is that up to 3 years worth of claims experience may be used in the calculation of that premium. And while we're not going to get into the detail about the calculation of experience rated employers, because it can be quite technical and quite detailed just for this webinar, the main objective is to return your injured workers into the workplace safely and as soon as possible, per the nominated treating doctor's certification on the certificate of capacity. Now, we have also had a large number of questions come through in relation to excess. Now, excess changed as part of the workers' compensation legislation reforms from the 1st of July 2026, and CIRA have published a fact sheet called the Employer Excess Guidance, which provides examples and provides further clarity, but noting that excess will apply to claims where the date of injury is covered by a policy that has been renewed on or after 4 p.m. on the 30th of June 2026. So the amount of excess is based on the first 2 weeks that a worker receives weekly payments, and it does include the first week the worker is entitled to weekly payments above $0 and the week immediately after. And the excess amount is the total of these 2 weeks of weekly payments. We will provide the link to the CIRA document, the Employer Excess Guidance, in our post-event email. And we always encourage employers to contact one of our underwriters to discuss their own individual policy. And again, that number is 134422. So we have also held some webinars in June to explain the premium calculations in a lot more detail for both experience rated and small employers. And these recordings for the webinar will also they're available on the Mobile Engagement Team website, and we'll pass the details on to you at the end of the session. So Hux, you've mentioned an industry or a WIC rating a few times now. Can you explain how this all works?
Yeah, and I'll actually just take this opportunity there also, just to let everyone know that everyone will receive an email, probably later today or tomorrow, with links to the various bits and pieces, resources that we're talking about, but also a link back to our webpage with those recordings that you've just mentioned, Kristen, where they're housed. And we do also have some recordings on there for cross-border and contractors as well, which we spoke about a moment ago. But let's get into, how we rate policy under the workers' compensation industry rates, or WIC, as we've just referred to them, how we apply them to each policy. And look, we often get asked, why doesn't a different rate apply to each individual worker in a business? Because the job tasks and therefore the risks will vary, from person to person in a business. Like for example, a small mechanic workshop would have mechanics on the tools, probably repairing cars and the like, but also some administration staff who don't lift much more than a pen. Now, we don't apply a different rate to the administration staff when compared to the mechanics, as the business is assessed on the industry it is involved in. And if we didn't have the mechanics in that business example I just gave in a moment ago, then really the business would not exist. It is an industry based system. So when we apply a rate to a business, we look at the purpose of that business and consider why does it exist, and as it is an industry-based rating system. Therefore, the classification applied to the business is the one that most accurately describes the entire business of the employer. And we use this principle to every business policy in New South Wales. I'm just going to use the example on the screen. We've got some images there, Kristen, and this is we'll just call it, I don't know if you can see this, it's a plastic bottle, manufacturing business there, and we can see cleaners, factory workers, machine operators, administration staff, and warehouse workers. But when we come to assess the rate, which rate to apply, we would apply the rate for bottle manufacturing, as this is why the business exists. I'm just going to add one final point about this, and that is about the rate charged to each industry. And it is based on the performance of a single employer in every category. Sorry, I should say a single employer in every category will indirectly impact the overall rate that is charged to all employees in the same category based on an employer's performance. So everyone plays a role. So when I talk about performance, when we talk about performance, we're referring to the claims ratio to wages and premium charged. So what we're saying is if enough employees in a single category perform better over time, then this can impact the overall rate that is charged. Kristen, why don't you introduce our mate Rick, who does own a restaurant, and let's explain how we calculate his premium.
Absolutely. So this is Rick. He runs a cafe, and his annual wage bill is $1 million, and his annual average performance premium, or APP, is $22,500. And this is calculated by multiplying the annual salary by the WIC rate percentage, as we can see there on screen. I also want to mention that the premium saving that is available for most employers is that if you can pay your premium in full by the due date, then a small employer can receive a 5% discount, or an experienced rated employer can receive a 3% discount. However, absolutely appreciate that that is not always possible. And in that case, you can pay by monthly installments at no extra cost, but you won't receive the pay in full discount. So, Hux, we've just explained the basics of a premium calculation. So why don't you run through the renewal and policy cycle and the importance of declaring wages on time?
Yeah, perfect. So there's a few things policyholders need to understand about the declaration of wages. And first of all, every year, every employer's policy is renewed on an estimate of wages because no one really knows what they're going to pay, in total wages to all of their staff. Then at the end of the year, end of the policy period, the employer must declare the true or actual wages in a wages declaration online. This is an obligation for all employers, and it's really important for a number of reasons. And look, these include by submitting and completing the declaration of actual wages means you'll be paying the fair and accurate premium. And if you fail to submit your declaration of wages on time, you can actually be charged 30% loading in your following year's renewal premium until you complete that declaration. So employers have 4 months, 4 months from the expiry of their policy to complete that declaration. So that should be plenty of time. And sometimes employers will rely on their bookkeeper, financial controller, or accountant to help in that process. But one really important resource is the wages definition manual, which provides guidance on what is assessable in wages and what should and shouldn't be declared in that wages declaration. We're going to send everyone a link to that wages declaration manual as part of that email I've already referenced, but it also provides some really great and useful information about some of the more complex areas that we've already discussed, like how to treat working directors or contractors, or even things like family trusts and the like. So yeah, everyone's going to receive a copy of that, as I said, in the email later on. Also, with a reference to, I suppose, apprentice wages, you need to declare the apprentice wages on the form. There's a separate field for that as well, and we'll tell you how we treat that in a moment's time. Now, should you need any support or assistance completing the process, completing your wages declaration, it's best to call the number which we haven't got on the screen, but we're going to provide everyone, which is 134422. And we're going to give information how to contact the underwriting and policy team, at the end of the session on one of the final slides. So, Kristen, we've talked a lot about policy and premiums and how they're calculated and the like. So let's flick the switch and tell the audience what to do, what to expect after a workplace injury should that occur.
Absolutely. So the what to do of if you have a workplace injury really starts the day that you begin your business, not the day that someone's injured. So it is important that as you establish your business, you're aware of the requirements in relation to workplace health and safety, return to work, and what to do if someone gets hurt. You are required to display the CIRA if you get injured at work poster in your workplace, and this contains steps on what to do, as well as the name and phone number of your claims service provider. You should also ensure that you have all of your workers' personal and contact details, and this includes name, date of birth, phone number, email, the address, and be able to obtain for the pay slips for the 52 weeks immediately before the injury, because this is then used to calculate their pre-injury average weekly earnings, or POE. And it's important to provide this information in a timely manner following an injury to ensure that your worker can be contacted and treatment can be approved and that weekly wage benefits can be established. It's also important that you prioritise contacting the claim service provider and providing any requested information as soon as possible to keep your claim on track. And as noted on the slide, the primary focus should be on providing support to your worker, as there is a lot of analysis and research to show that early intervention maximises a worker's recovery and minimises business impacts. And where possible, we want our workers remaining connected to the workplace. So identifying and providing suitable duties in line with the certificate of capacity is also really important. And all businesses must have a return to work program established within 12 months of becoming an employer. And this forms the basis for the return to work plan to be developed, which is then tailored to the individual worker and the individual injury and agreed to by the employer, the worker, and the nominated treating doctor. And the cycle on the slide provides a helpful flow of things that you can do as an employer. And through the Small Business Hub, there are a range of checklists available to support you and guide you through what to do if your worker is injured. And through the life of the claim, you'll promote recovery at work. Again, there's so much data about the positive outcomes for employers and employees to maintain connections to that pre-injury role and workplace. And in addition to this, you should also complete a risk assessment to determine what went wrong and what can be done to limit this occurring again. And within the icare Small Business Hub, there is the icare Prevention Injury Team, and they have some amazing tools and resources for businesses, as well as Safe Work New South Wales, who can assist with workplace health and safety, risk assessment, and hazard elimination or minimisation. One of the most important things an employer can do for their injured worker is to maintain contact. And this can be done on an ad hoc basis, or you might want to lock in agreed times to catch up with your worker as they recover. So, Hux, I've spoken a lot about the what to do and shared some of the benefits, but can you share some of the data that supports this?
Yeah, and I've just put up the data here on the screen here, Kristen. Now, the data shows us that reporting a claim within 5 days can result in a much quicker return to work and therefore have a much lesser impact on your business's productivity than those claims reported outside of the 5 days. As you can see, only 60% of all claims on average are reported within 5 days in New South Wales. But these delays could be a result of employers maybe not knowing what to do, or perhaps they're fearful of a premium increase or fine, which is incorrect for small employers, as we've already discussed. And as the image shows, claims reported under 5 days cost an average of about $33,000 and have a duration of 60 days, which is still pretty significant. But when it comes to those claims reported outside of 5 days, the average cost is nearly double and the average duration is more than double, as you can see on the screen. So really important to report a claim as soon as you possibly can. Not only will this reduce the overall claims cost, but the impact for your business's productivity And yeah, also will result in a much quicker return to work for the worker as well. In addition, there's also the other indirect impacts on your industry or WIC rates, which we discussed earlier on. As a result of those increased claims costs and the rate that is charged. So many reasons to report a claim, workplace injury as soon as possible and be proactive. Now, Krista, what we're going to do now, we're going to move on to some talk about some savings that may be a result of early reporting of claims, but also there's a number of incentives and rebates that are available for New South Wales businesses that can be accessed through different means. And one of these is the apprentice discount, which we've kind of touched on a couple of times already. If you employ apprentices, may be eligible for this apprentice discount if you meet the criteria that we're showing you on the screen right now. Now, you still need to declare the wages to apprentices, and this is done separately on your wage form. But what happens next is that you're likely to receive a phone call from one of our underwriters who'll discuss this with you. And then you should receive the discount in the form of the wages being discounted from the overall wages used in the calculation. So, Kristen, over to you to talk about the next incentive, which is the SafeWorks Small Business Rebate. What is it? How do employers obtain this one?
Sure thing. Thanks, Hux. So, the Safe Work Rebate for small employers is a great program that offers up to $1,000 towards the cost of workplace health and safety items. So, essentially, if you invest in any of the eligible items, you can claim reimbursement. And it has a vast amount of safety items that are included that you can purchase and seek a rebate of up to $1,000 if you meet the criteria. And the criteria is different to the icare definition of small business, as it doesn't apply to the premium amount, and it does look at apply to a business that has less than 50 full-time employees. There are some other terms and conditions and eligibility criteria, but ultimately the program's objective is to help small business purchase safety items to improve the work health and safety for you and for your workers.
And there's a couple of examples here of the various items that are available there. And that's just a snapshot. There are dozens and dozens of different items that are available from non-slip mats and all these bits and pieces you can see here on the screen. But there's a link there on that slide, the eligible items list, which sort of show you what you can purchase. And this is updated from time to time as well, so it's good to review that in your own time. But I'll just move on to one of the other incentives, which is this is for small employers again, this Zero Recover at Work Assist. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail. There's lots of detail on the screen there. There's lots of information. But basically, for those small employees that meet the criteria, if you have a claim, you may be able to claim up to $400 per week for a period of 6 weeks if you need to hire additional assistance whilst your worker cannot complete their full duties. It's good. If you do have a claim, it's best to talk to the case manager who's managing the claim about that. Look, all the information again, it's on the slide. Just a reminder that everyone who's registered for today's event is going to receive a copy of all these slides. So you have all the information to look at your own time. So Krista, before we finish up, why don't you share some detail about an important resource, which you've mentioned a couple of times already, the Small Business Hub.
Yeah, absolutely. This is my favorite resource for small business, and it is a small business home. It's a home to a heap of resources across policy, premium, injury prevention, what to do if someone is hurt at work. To access it, you can either scan the QR code on the screen, but you'll also receive a link in the post-event email. I would recommend saving this as a favorite to your work computer and having a look at a new section each week, because there is so much great, useful information that is going to help you get started and get off on the right foot for your business.
All right, well, what I might do is I might run through the key takeaways, Krista, before we finish up here. And I've just listed them on the screen here, so I'm just going to whip through these pretty quick. Again, pay your premium in full, and you can get that pay in full discount. 5% for small employers, 3% for experience rated. Apprenticeship wages are discounted off your premium, and direct claims costs are not used in your premium if you are a small employer. And again, so many small employers don't understand this and hesitate to report a claim. But report a claim within 5 days, and you receive a much quicker return to work, on average 66 days across the scheme. So it's pretty significant. Make sure you declare your wages. You have an obligation to do so. We don't want to overcharge. You want to make sure you're paying the correct premium. Access to Zero Recover at Work. Should you be a small employer and have trouble backfilling people's roles, there is the SafeWorks Small Business Rebate, which you can claim up to $1,000 for purchasing safety equipment. So why not? utilize this icare small business hub, which Kristen has just talked about a moment ago. And if you need to contact the icare policy team about anything we've spoken about, the policy renewal, deemed workers, that type of thing, you've got the number and the email there on the screen. So what we're going to do now, Kristen, just as we wrap it up, hopefully we've cleaned up a few things that New South Wales employees need to know, and hopefully we've busted a few myths along the way. So what we want to do now is we want to obtain a little bit of feedback about what people thought of the session, because we like to keep these sessions, pretty short and sharp to about half an hour. And we're right on the half an hour point now, and not too long. And just between 1 and 5, we're just going to bring up a really quick poll. What did you think? Between 1 and 5, if you thought it was useful, you got something out of it, you'd give it a 4 or a 5. If it was so-so, you'd give it a 3. If it was a waste of time, you'd give it a 1 or a 2. But at this point of time, the chat should also come up here, and it'll allow you to put in any feedback, any suggestions as well, for future sessions, what you thought of the session, but any Q&A, any questions you've got there. So what we'll do, even though we are at time, Chris, we might just hang around, you and I, just answer a couple of these questions that come through just for a couple of minutes there, as we sort of promised. But we also encourage, as I said before, anyone on the call who's got questions to contact our team. We'll provide you with the numbers in the slide pack, which will get emailed out after the session here as well. So just allow people then just to put in the feedback there, and the questions are starting to come through there. If you how are you going, Chris? I'll let you pick out a couple, and you can throw the tough questions
Thanks, Ux.
to me if you like.
So there do continue to be some questions coming through in relation to further detail around deemed workers and contractors. So while we don't have the time to go into each question specifically, where can employers find out more information about these?
Yeah, and look, that's a good point, because I think, when we look at deemed workers, contractors, even cross-border, again, I mentioned earlier, it's a case-by-case basis. You really need to talk through with a bit of an expert, one of the underwriting team members, to sort of look at the situation for yourselves. But look, we also ran a couple of webinars not long ago, late last year, and we have recordings that are available for people to watch, which again, this is available on our mobile engagement team page. We're going to send a link out to that page. There's also, a number of other sessions on there, not just the contractor sessions across border, but all the sessions that, just like this one that we're hosting today. They're all recorded and are housed on that webpage for anyone to watch, in their own time. And they're only about half an hour long. They're not too long. So, yeah.
Excellent. And that's probably the second most popular question that is coming through, is about the recording for today's session. So where can people find that, and when will it be available?
Yep. Session has been recorded. Will be available on the mobile engagement team webpage, where everything is housed. Everyone's going to get a link anyway to it. We're going to send out a copy of that recording when it's ready to everyone that registered for today's session. So in about a week or so, I think it's coming out. So yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. Anything else, or is that it for now?
Probably it for now. There's a lot of quite specific questions coming through,
Okay.
and it's just not the sort of thing that we can answer in this type of forum.
Yeah, okay. Well, before we drop off, I'll just add that we are, there's also a QR code I didn't mention before, Kristen. That's actually a link to our webpage as well, where everything is housed. And again, you can see we do a lot of face-to-face events, and you can see on the screen where we're heading very shortly. You'll be in Cessnock this time next week on the 25th, hosting a toast and talk for local businesses. So if anyone's coming from that region there, it's a bit of a small business breakfast session. The details again on that QR code. And then we've got a few sessions coming up in Hurstville, in Liverpool, in the wider Sydney region, on the 3rd and 22nd of September. So again, if you want to come along, it'd be great to see you. We've got some different sessions there, which will go for a couple of hours, and it'd be great to see you there. And also, a couple of sessions are going to be presented in different languages, which is really exciting. Session in Hurstville will have a second session in Mandarin, and then a session in Liverpool in Hindi as well. So this is the first time we've presented in other languages. So we're really excited to be doing that today. Well, Kristen, we're at time. We've gone over time. Might have spoken too much at the end there. Sorry about that. But look, thanks everyone for coming along. I hope you got something out of it. Please pop your feedback into the Q&A and complete the poll. We do take the feedback very seriously, and it helps us develop new material and new content for future sessions. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Kristen for coming along today. And hopefully we'll see people at a session face to face soon.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.